you did some movies, right?
I did, yes.
So
I have.
did you?
I still am.
You still are? Let's talk about that for
Sure,
a minute, because
sure.
I think this is fascinating.
Yeah.
And some of them, people may have heard of the movies that you've been in. Now, were you a director? Were you financing them? Were you kind of tell us your involvement with the movie industry?
Well,
and how did it happen?
Yep. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take one step back.
Yeah, please.
When I moved here in 2000, I drove across the country with a high school friend with all my worldly possessions. And when we saw Mount Rainier, we're like, let's make a pact. Within 2 years, let's climb Mount Rainier.
Okay.
And so my brother, he's a firefighter back in Green Bay. We've climbed for a decade, 2000 to 2010. We climbed all the mountains in the Northwest and other places in Mexico, even attempted Denali up in Alaska. But for me, that was a huge outlet to recharge, to get perspective, to fill up the buckets in my life, whether it be work, my family, everything, my relationships. And it motivated me and inspired me because I was removed from the busy work that we were in, which was a lot. Like you and I both know, we worked hours and hours and hours for many, many years. But climbing allowed me to recharge and rejuvenate. So once we kind of hung up our ice axes and our crampons, because everyone had younger families and that time away was very precious. Do you want to go spend a week on the beach with your wife and kids? Or do you want to spend a week on the mountain, in a smelly tent with your buddy?
Right.
Which priorities shift. So in 2010, we kind of said, okay, we're going to shelf that. And then I was like, for 2 years, starting to feel that vacuum, that gap, that missing piece. And I started to get a little anxious. And then I just I took some writing workshops, and then I took some filmmaking workshops. I'm like, I need to get back into creative. And if I'm not going to be climbing, I want to be creative and fill up those other buckets. So I started, just putting it out there, and I started talking to people. Yeah, I'm interested in, starting to get into filmmaking and writing more. And so one thing led to another. Our first documentary that I helped produce was K2 Siren of the Himalayas. And it happened because I was just throwing it out there to people. And one of my friends is like, hey, I've got a friend, and they just made this movie Sonic Skate. And they got another one that they're looking at, and it's about these guys that tried to climb K2. I'm like, okay, that's a nice seamless transition from climbing to documentary filmmaking. Let's make a climbing documentary. So we worked really hard on that for 6 months, all in, still doing the day job, still doing the family and everything. But again, this is my creative outlet. And, we got to tour at film festivals throughout the world. We won awards, and it was super rewarding. And then it was like, okay, that filled me up in ways that I couldn't get in other areas of my life. So then we went on, and I'm still making documentary films as a producer. Sometimes it's an executive producer, but a lot of times I really enjoy the hands-on nature of being the producer in the day-to-day. We did Dirtbag, The Legend of Fred Beckey.
I saw that one.
That was in 2017. Super proud of that one. We were able to complete it before Fred's passing at 90. He was 93. And is
that still available on major streaming outlets or
Amazon? You can watch it for free on Amazon Prime. And again, we're super proud of that because we were able to tap into. Fred was a mentor to many people. He was a very divisive kind of individual because he lived life with a singular purpose. He has more first ascents of North American peaks than anyone. He wrote all these guidebooks. In fact, when I was climbing, I remember buying one of Fred's guidebooks for one of the climbs we were doing, which is pretty cool, and we spent the last few years of our life with him. But we partnered with Patagonia. They were actually a sponsor on it because Fred was Yvon Chouinard's, mentor. And Yvon always kind of looked over Fred because Fred thought that was a sellout. All these guys that made all these clothing companies and outdoor gear companies, he only wanted to go climbing. And if you had a job or a wife or a family and you couldn't go climbing with them, then he'd say, all right, screw you. I'm going to go to the next guy and we'll find a new partner. Anyway, so it's that human character study that we really enjoyed in some of these adventure documentaries that we've been producing. Sam Now is just nominated as a finalist for a Peabody. That's on PBS.
What's that one? What was that one?
Sam Now.
Sam Now?
Yeah, it's a local Seattle family dealing with generational trauma and kind of how to break that cycle. And it was filmed over 30 years, very artistic film and very real and raw and vulnerable. So that's another one to check out.
All right, I will.
But yeah, we're working on one right now that has to do with the wool industry and kind of the impact of, regenerative ranching practices and how these forever chemicals are now starting to be banned in states, like even Gore-Tex and stuff. So there's this tap back into the wool industry, and we got to visit with all these ranchers and stuff over this last year, and it was very, very interesting.
Wow. Well, yeah, I did watch the It was on Netflix. Was it on Netflix
Yeah,
for a while?
a lot of them are still available on other streaming platforms like Netflix and Apple TV, and all that stuff.
Yeah, Dirtbag was really good. If it, and you mentioned Mount Rainier, and if you're not from the Pacific Northwest, like Mount Rainier is just this ominous, mountain that shoots out above the clouds. So I could see where someone, coming to this area would be like, okay, I got to go to the top of that thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really impressive mountain. I'm sure many people have heard of it, but unless you've been in the Northwest or in Seattle and you see it, you're like, you can see it from everywhere.
It's 100 miles from Seattle, but when it's a clear day, it's like popping. It's so big.
It's crazy. Well, that's really cool. Well, that's, so many people don't have these, I wanted to bring up the filmmaking thing because it's so random, but at the same time, so many people could benefit from finding a creative outlet or finding, a hobby or something. And we get so mired in our jobs and our work.
Agreed.
And so good for you for taking the time. And for your family and your wife for letting you explore that kind of stuff, right? I mean, you have a good support network to be able to do some of that stuff.
Yeah.